They removed Maren Ashlow's chair before the first ancestral course was served. Not after supper. Not quietly. Before. The servants carried it through the Morne Winter Supper Hall while every noble bloodline watched, its carved wolf feet scraping over black stone with a sound too close to a whimper. Maren stood beside the old hearth with a silver bread bowl in her hands, still wearing the plain dark gown she had used to prepare the supper rite since dawn. Her fingers smelled of salt, smoke, and winter rosemary. No jewel marked her throat. No family ring warmed her hand. At the long table, 31 chairs waited beneath hanging antlers and moon-black banners. 31 places for the living Morne bloodline, pledged allies, honored widows, and the noble bride Audric Morne was expected to announce before winter's end. Maren's place had been the 32nd, a small chair near the lower left side. Not important, not grand, not even carved with her name. But for 7 years, it had stood there because old Wolf House law allowed one ward seat for the person who prepared the ancestral supper and named the dead before the living ate. Lady Housekeeper Elva Thornridge stepped into the empty space with a calm smile. "Forgive the disruption," she said to the court. "An error in seating has been corrected." A few nobles glanced at Maren with the careful pity people offered when they wanted cruelty to look procedural. Wolf Prince Audric Morne sat at the head of the table, one hand resting near his untouched cup of black wine. Candlelight cut along his severe face, catching the dark gold in his eyes. He was not yet king, but the room already lowered its breath around him. Broad-shouldered, black-haired, dressed in winter velvet and wolf fur, Audric carried command, like a blade kept sheathed only because he had not chosen where to cut. He looked at the empty space where Maren's chair had been, then at Elva, not at Maren. That hurt more than laughter would have. Elva bowed her head toward him. "Your Grace, the noble family's requested clarity before the engagement supper begins. A ward of uncertain house standing should not be seated among Morne blood during ancestral rites." Maren's hands tightened around the bread bowl. Uncertain house standing. That was what they called a woman who had spent half her life keeping their dead from being forgotten. Audric's jaw moved once. "Maren has prepared the supper since my mother died, and done so well," Elva replied gently. As service, the word crossed the hall and found every old bruise in Maren's chest. Service. She had laid the bone salt, trimmed the black candles, remembered which dead uncle hated bitter herbs, and which dead grandmother had demanded barley honey in the first cup. She had learned the dead tastes because no one else wished to remember them long enough to feed them. She had patched old prayer cloths, soothed widows, stopped quarrels between cousins, and stood outside locked doors while this family broke in private. Service, not belonging. Maren lowered the bread bowl to the side table. The ancestral supper cannot begin without the ward seat. Elva's smile did not change. The ward seat is for blood-bound wards. My oath was accepted by the old hearth. Your oath was tolerated by grief. The hall went cold around the words. Audric finally looked at Maren. There was something in his eyes then. Not softness. Not yet. A flicker of pain buried beneath royal restraint, as if part of him had heard the wrongness, and another part refused to shame the table by answering it. Beside him sat Lady Caressa Vale, the noble woman everyone expected him to marry. Her white sleeves were embroidered with tiny silver wolves. She looked at Maren as one might look at a servant who had forgotten which door was hers. Elva lifted one hand. "Maren Ashlow, you may wait in the corridor until the kitchen requires you." A servant near the wall flinched. Maren did not. She had learned years ago that dignity sometimes meant not giving the room the satisfaction of seeing where the blade entered. She looked at Audric. "Is that your command?" The question should not have been dangerous. It was. Audric's fingers closed around the stem of his cup. The supper must proceed cleanly. He did not say she had no place. He only chose words that let the room remove her, without making him look cruel. He knew the ward seat had never been questioned while his mother lived. He only let it be questioned now because silence kept the noble table easier to manage. Maren nodded once. She turned from the table, took up the covered bowl of first bread, and carried it toward the corridor. At the threshold, she paused because the old hearth behind her gave a low crack. No one else seemed to hear it, or no one wished to. The Morne Winter Supper Hall had been built before the throne room, before treaty banners, before nobles began treating family rites as theatre. Its chairs were not ordinary wood. They had been carved from wolf ash trees that grew over the burial ground of the first Morne pack. The chairs did not choose favorites. They did not crown brides. They remembered supper order. The ward's seat was not honor. It was sequence. Remove it before the dead were named, and every living place at the table became a theft. The dead were named first. The ward seat remained present, and only then could the living eat without stealing from the ancestors. Maren knew that. She had been the only one still preparing the plates correctly. Elva said, "Do not linger in the doorway." Maren stepped into the corridor. The servants shut the heavy doors behind her. Inside, the first chair moved. The sound came through the wood, a long scraping turn, then another, then another. Voices rose inside the hall. Someone gasped. A cup struck stone and shattered. Maren stood alone in the pale, moonlit corridor with the bread bowl in her hands and did not breathe. The doors groaned open by themselves. Every empty chair in the Morne Winter Supper Hall had turned away from the prince. 31 carved wolf head backs now faced the table. 31 seats faced the corridor, faced her. At the head of the table, Audric Morne stood slowly, his cup overturned beside his hand. Elva Thornridge had gone white. The chair that had been carried away scraped back into the hall without anyone touching it, stopped at the threshold, and bowed its carved wolf head toward Maren Ashlow's feet. No chair in the hall faced the table now. Not one would witness the living eat. Audric looked from the bowed ward seat to the 31 chairbacks turned against his table. His voice did not soften. What law did I break? The first ancestral course remained untouched. Black bread sat under its silver cover at the side table, still warm from Maren Ashlow's hands. Beside it rested the dead name cloth, folded in 3 careful layers, each crease dusted with hearth ash. The bone salt bowl had not been poured. The first cup had not been lifted. No living mouth had tasted supper, yet every chair had already turned its back on the table. Audric Morne stood at the head of the room, with his overturned cup bleeding black wine across the stone. He had asked what law he had broken, but the question did not make him humble. Not yet. His voice still carried command, only sharpened now by the fact that command had failed to move a single chair. Elva Thornridge answered before Maren could. "No law, your grace," she said, regaining color beneath her tight gray veil. "Only an old habit reacting to disturbance. The ward seat is courtesy, not blood law." Maren stood at the threshold, with the bread bowl in her hands. The returned chair rested before her feet, carved wolf head lowered toward the hem of her plain dark gown. She did not touch it. She did not step around it. If she entered too quickly, they would call that hunger. If she sat too quickly, they would call that ambition. She had learned the weight of rooms that waited to rename a woman's dignity. Lady Caressa Vale lifted her chin from Audric's right side. If the supper cannot proceed without a servant's seat, then perhaps the rite itself has been kept too loosely. The noble families murmured approval, grateful for a sentence that made exclusion sound like reform. Maren looked at Caressa, then at Audric. "You seated the living over an unfed dead corse," she said. Audric's jaw tightened. "Speak plainly." "I did." Elva stepped between them, not enough to block Maren from view, enough to remind the court whose office controlled the hall. The old hearth tolerated a morning convenience. It did not grant permanent ward standing. "Grief permission is not blood law," Caressa added softly. Maren's fingers tightened around the silver bowl. "No. But hearth oath is older than blood seating." Elva's smile sharpened. "You are service, Maren. Valued service, necessary service. But service does not become family because it remembers which spoon to place beside a dead uncle's cup." The bread bowl grew colder in Maren's hands. Not from fear, from the old hearth listening. Maren carried the bowl back into the room, stepping only as far as the threshold chair allowed. The 31 chairs did not move. They faced her, not lovingly, not worshipfully, like witnesses waiting for order to be restored. She set the silver bowl on the nearest stone bench and unfolded the dead name cloth. Audric watched her hands. "What are you doing?" "What you should have waited to see before letting my chair be carried out." Elva drew a sharp breath. "Do not instruct the prince in his own hall. This is not his hall first," Maren said. "It is the supper hall of his dead." That struck Audric harder than accusation. His eyes flicked to the old hearth, where the ashes beneath the black candles had begun to gather in thin lines. Maren lifted the dead name cloth. Embroidered along its border were the first Morne names, stitched in soot-black thread. Wolves who had built the Winter Hall, mothers who had buried sons, sons who had died before inheritance, widows who had kept the pack from eating itself in famine. The cloth was not beautiful. It was old, smoke-stained, and mended in a dozen places by Maren's own hand. "The supper order is simple," she said. "The dead are named first. The ward seat remains present, because the keeper of names stands between hunger and the living table. The first bread is broken for the dead, before any living cup is raised." Audric looked at the untouched bread. "Then name them." Maren's face did not change. "No," the word cut more cleanly than shouting would have. Elva seized it. "You hear her. She refuses the prince." Maren looked at Audric. "I refuse to perform a rite after you remove the place that makes the rite lawful." Audric's fingers curled against the table edge. "The chair has returned, by force of the hall, not by admission of the court." The carved wolf head at her feet gave one low scrape over stone. Maren looked down once, then back up. "I will not sit until the room admits who removed my place before the dead were named." Elva's eyes flashed. "This is pride." "No," Maren said. "Pride would be wanting your table. I want the dead fed in the order they were promised." Caressa's mouth tightened. "And if the prince commands you," Maren looked at Audric. He had commanded her once tonight, cleanly, politely, cruelly enough to leave no bruise anyone could see. "Then the chairs will turn their backs again," she said. Audric did not like that answer. Good. Some truths should arrive without comfort. He looked toward the hearth ash. Why will the first course not begin without the ward seat? Maren unfolded the final layer of the cloth and revealed a narrow space left blank among the names, not empty from neglect. Kept open by design. "The ward seat is not for honor," she said. "It is where the keeper answers when the dead ask who remembers them. Remove it, and the dead, name cloth, has no living witness." Elva spoke sharply. "A servant can stand and recite." Maren's eyes turned cold. "Service prepares supper. Oath keeps the dead from eating the living." The old hearth cracked. This time everyone heard it. The black bread beneath the silver cover hardened with a sound like bone freezing. The cup at Audric's place overturned farther by itself, spilling wine toward the ancestral plates instead of the living setting. No chair moved. They did not need to. The supper order had already given its answer. Maren lifted the bread cover. The first loaf had split down the center. Inside, where steam should have risen, dark ash filled the crumb. Across the ash, old Morne letters formed in a hand no living scribe had written. The dead corpse refuses the living table. Audric Morne reached for the split loaf before anyone could stop him. The ash inside it did not scatter. It clung to the broken bread in dark veins, forming old Morne letters that no court scribe had dared write, and no servant could have carved quickly enough. The dead corpse refuses the living table. His fingers stopped a hair above the crust. Maren Ashlow watched him from the threshold, the ward's seat still bowed at her feet. She did not warn him away. Some lessons had to be felt at the edge of the hand. Elva Thornridge moved first. "Do not touch it, Your Grace. The rite has been disturbed. The course is spoiled." Maren looked at the bread. "Spoiled things rot. This is refusing." Caressa Vale folded her white sleeves carefully in her lap. Or perhaps the supper refuses, because the woman who prepared it now withholds service. The words were smooth enough to pass as reason. That made them crueler. Maren turned her head. "If I wished to withhold service, the dead name cloth would still be locked in the lower press. The bone salt would be unburned, and your first cup would taste like iron by midnight." Several nobles shifted away from their wine. Audric looked at her sharply. "Would it?" "Yes." Elva's expression hardened. "Enough. She frightens the table because fright gives her standing." "No," Maren said. "The table is frightened because it remembers the order you tried to correct." Audric withdrew his hand from the bread. "Who gave you the ward's seat?" Elva answered. "No one gave it. It appeared during the mourning years after Lady Mother Isolde Morne died. A kindness became custom." Maren felt the name strike her ribs. Isolde Morne, Audric's mother, the woman who had found Maren half-starved outside the winter kitchens at 16, clutching a bundle of dead-name cloths she had rescued from damp storage because no one else had known they mattered. The woman who had not smiled often, but had once placed Maren's hand over the old hearth and said, "Remembering is not serving, child. It is standing between mouths." Audric's gaze stayed on Elva. "A kindness?" Elva lowered her head. "Your mother was generous in grief." Maren stepped one pace into the hall. The ward's seat scraped after her, but she did not sit. "Your mother was exact," she said. Audric's jaw tightened. "Say what you mean." Maren lifted the dead-name cloth in both hands. "Lady Mother Isolde did not put that chair beside the table because she pitied me. She entered the ward seat into the supper order after your father's third winter decline." A cold stir passed through the hall. Audric's face changed by almost nothing, but Maren saw the cut land. His father's decline was not spoken of at supper. Old Prince Audric Morne had died with his wolf, starving under full plates, because the ancestral rite had been performed as ceremony instead of feeding. Elva's voice sharpened. "That record is not in the house ledger." "No," Maren said. "It is in the hearth, ash." Caressa gave a small laugh. "Ash cannot hold law." The old hearth answered, with a crack, like a bone snapping. Caressa's smile vanished. Maren carried the dead-name cloth to the side table and laid it beside the ash-filled bread. She unfolded the border where soot-black names circled the fabric. At first the stitching looked ordinary. Old dead listed by order of hunger, mourning, and blood. Then Maren took a pinch of bone salt and rubbed it gently across the lower corner. Ash rose from the cloth. Not smoke, writing. A hidden line emerged beneath the final name, faint but clear, stitched once in grey thread and sealed by hearth soot. Ward seat entered by Isolde Morne, winter of the third hunger. Audric stepped down from the head of the table. Elva did not move, but her hands tightened in front of her. Maren continued. "The line was covered because ward law embarrasses people who prefer clean blood charts." Audric looked at Elva. "You knew this?" Elva's answer came too quickly. I knew of a mourning notation, not law. Maren's eyes chilled. You ordered the lower corner folded under every supper since Lady Isolde died. Elva turned toward the court. Because displaying a servant's claim in ancestral cloth would invite confusion. Service prepares supper, Maren said. Oath keeps the dead from eating the living. Audric looked at the hidden line. If this was entered by my mother, why was I not told? Maren did not soften. Because you were easier to manage hungry, the words took the air from the room. For one heartbeat, the prince looked less like a ruler than a man hearing the old growl inside his own blood. His hand moved near his stomach, then stopped, as if he remembered the court could see him. Maren noticed. So did Elva. Caressa's eyes narrowed. Audric's voice dropped. Name the dead. Maren stood very still. Not yet. A warning traveled through the chairs. Not movement this time, but pressure. 31 carved wolf heads remained turned away from the living table. Audric's eyes flashed. The course refuses. The bloodline is at risk. Name them. Maren held the cloth between them. The ward seat was removed in public. The correction must be public, Elva said. She demands humiliation. No, Maren replied. I demand sequence. Audric looked from the ash line to the bowed chair, then to the nobles waiting behind their untouched plates. His voice remained hard. What must be said? Maren looked at Elva, who removed the ward seat before the dead were named. Elva's face turned still. Caressa said softly, Must this become a trial before supper? Maren answered without looking at her. It became one when my chair was carried out like shame. Audric turned to Elva. Answer. Elva's lips parted. For the first time that night, she had no polished phrase ready. The hearth ash lifted from the cloth and drifted across the table, settling over the empty space where Maren's chair had been. There, in grey letters, Isolde Morne's hidden supper notation burned through the table polish. Ward seat, entered by matriarch oath. Audric looked at the burned notation, then at Elva. His voice did not soften. Where is the record that made my mother's ward seat a service error? Elva did not deny the matriarch oath. That was the first thing Maren noticed. Not guilt, not fear, not even surprise. Calculation. Lady Housekeeper Elva Thornridge stood beside the long table with 31 chairbacks, turned against the living places, and her face settled into the calm shape of a woman, choosing which truth could be made smaller. The notation exists, Elva said. No one disputes Lady Isolde's grief. Audric Morne did not sit. No chair had offered him permission. His overturned cup still bled black wine toward the ancestral plates, and the ash letters burned through the polished table before him. Ward seat, entered by matriarch oath. Audric's eyes stayed on Elva. Where is the record that made my mother's ward seat a service error? Elva lowered her chin. In the house office, Your Grace. Bring it. A servant moved at once. Maren remained by the threshold. The ward seat bowed at her feet. She did not sit in it. The correction had not been made. The room had only admitted there was something to correct. Caressa Vale watched all of it with pale, careful composure. Her silver wolf sleeves lay folded over her lap, as if even her hands refused to appear unsettled. Elva turned slightly toward the court. A matriarch's mourning notation is not permanent blood law. Lady Isolde was beloved, but grief often grants what law would not. Maren looked at the burned table. Grief did not write that line. Hearth ash did. Hearth ash remembers what people feed it, Elva replied. It does not decide inheritance. No one asked it to decide inheritance. Then why does your chair stand where family belongs? Maren's throat tightened, but her voice did not. Because family was starving. A small silence opened. Audric looked at her then, not gently, too sharply for gentleness. The word hungry still hung between them from the last thing she had said. Because you were easier to manage, hungry. He had not asked what she meant. Not yet. He wanted the record first. Because records could be held without admitting pain. The servant returned with a narrow black folder sealed in grey wax. Elva accepted it before anyone else could, then carried it to Audric with both hands. "This was filed properly before tonight's supper. Open it," Audric said. Elva broke the wax. The sound was small. The chairs did not move. The old hearth did not crack. The dead did not write across the walls. Maren was glad. Magic that answered too quickly made lazy judges of powerful men. Audric unfolded the record and set it flat on the table, beside the burned matriarch oath. The parchment was clean, newer than the supper cloth, its margins ruled in grey ink. At the top, in Elva's office hand, were the words, "Seating clarification for winter engagement supper." Caressa's eyes flickered. Maren saw it. So did Audric, Elva said. The noble table required clarification before Lady Caressa's announcement. There could be no uncertainty about precedence. Caressa lifted her chin. A marriage table cannot be built around an uncertain chair. Maren finally looked at her fully. Then your marriage table was built by erasing the dead. Caressa's face cooled. Audric's hand pressed slowly against the table. He did not defend Caressa. He did not defend Maren. He read. Maren stepped closer, still not past the ward seat. "The margin." Audric's gaze shifted. "What?" "The ash margin. House records that touch supper order must be ash-marked by the hearth before they are entered." Elva's mouth tightened. A procedural preference. A binding step. Maren lifted the dead name cloth and showed the court its lower corner, where Isolde's notation had been folded under for years. When Lady Isolde entered the ward seat, the ash line crossed the cloth and the table. That means the oath was accepted by the hall, not merely written by a grieving woman. Audric looked down at the new record. Its left margin was grey, too grey. Maren took the bone salt bowl and held it over the parchment. Elva's voice sharpened. "Do not tamper with house records." Maren paused. "Your Grace." Audric's eyes stayed on the page. "Continue." There was no apology in it, only permission. Maren accepted neither as kindness. She scattered a pinch of bone salt along the margin. Nothing rose. No old line, no ash seal, no hearth witness. Only grey powder, rubbed in after the fact, to mimic ritual approval. A murmur traveled through the hall. Elva stepped forward. The office ash was sufficient. The old hearth was not disturbed for every administrative correction. Maren looked at the parchment. This was not administrative. Audric's voice was low. "Read the stamp." More indeed. Near the lower edge, half covered by the folded corner, a square service mark had been pressed over older wording. "Service era ward seat. Classified as supper overflow." The hall seemed to shrink around the table. Maren did not speak at once. She reached for the folded edge of the record. Elva moved as if to stop her, but Audric's hand came down on the parchment first. "Let her read it." Maren unfolded the corner. Beneath the service stamp lay the original line, pale but legible, "Ward seat. Present by matriarch oath until dead name course completed." The stamp had not corrected the law. It had covered it. Maren's fingers left the parchment before her anger could tremble through them. Elva spoke carefully. The chair was not destroyed. It was moved out of active seating until the living order could be clarified. "Before the dead were named," Maren said, "for the dignity of the engagement table, for the convenience of the living, for the stability of the Morne house." Elva snapped, then caught herself. Her voice smoothed again. "Your Grace, rival families watch every sign. If a ward of uncertain origin sits before your betrothed is recognized, the court reads weakness." Audric's eyes lifted. So you marked my mother's oath as supper overflow. I clarified an ambiguity. Maren looked at the 31 chairbacks turned against the table. The chairs understood you clearly. Elva's face hardened. The chairs are old wood. No, Maren said. They are old witnesses. The hearth gave no dramatic answer. It did not need one. Audric picked up the record, holding it beside the burned oath on the table. His face was still unreadable, but the line of his mouth had gone pale with pressure. Who authorized this classification? He asked. Elva bowed her head just enough. The House Office did, under emergency seating authority. Maren's gaze went to the grey wax seal broken beside Audric's hand. Emergency seating authority. Used not for invasion, famine, or death. Used because Caressa Vale's announcement needed a cleaner table. Caressa stood slowly. Your Grace, surely this can be corrected after the supper. Let the dead be named now. Let the living eat. The court has already seen enough disorder. Maren answered before Audric could. The dead have seen more. The ward seated her feet scraped once toward the table, then stopped. Not inviting, waiting. Audric looked from the service stamp to the hidden line beneath it. Then he turned the parchment so the whole court could see. Across the grey stamped record, hearth ash began to darken, not writing new truth, only revealing the old one Elva's office had tried to bury. Ward seat, reclassified as service overflow, before engagement supper. For one hard moment, the court understood why the chairs had turned. The grey-stamped record lay in Audric Morne's hand, held high enough for every noble eye to read the sentence that Elva Thornridge's office had tried to make harmless. Ward seat, reclassified as service overflow before engagement supper. No one laughed. No one called it courtesy now. Maren Ashlow stood beside the bowed ward seat and watched silence move from face to face. It was a familiar silence, the kind that came after powerful people realized cruelty had left a paper trail. Elva recovered first. Classification is not removal, she said. The chair remained within the hall's inventory. It was not destroyed. It was only repositioned for the engagement order. Maren looked at the empty place by the lower left side of the table, repositioned into the corridor. For one supper, for the first dead course, Elva's lips thinned. You speak as if the dead care for furniture. Maren stepped closer to the table, careful not to pass the ward seat. No, they care for order. You changed the order. Audric lowered the record. His face had not softened. That almost made Maren trust him more. She did not need softness now. Softness could be used to end a scene without correcting it. What else did this record change? He asked. Elva's hand tightened around her keyring. Nothing relevant to tonight. Maren heard the wrongness before she knew where it sat. Nothing relevant. People used that phrase when relevance was exactly what they feared. She turned toward the parchment. There should be a second page. Caressa Vale gave a faint sigh. Must every administrative scrap be dragged over the supper table? The rite has already been made into spectacle. Maren looked at her. The spectacle began when my chair was carried past your sleeves. Caressa's eyes hardened, but she did not answer. Audric looked to Elva. The second page. Elva held still. A low scrape moved through the hall. Not from all the chairs. From one. The chair nearest the old hearth shifted an inch, just enough for its carved wolf claw to touch the shadow of the side cabinet. Maren did not look grateful. The chairs were not helping her win. They were pointing to a break in sequence. She went to the cabinet and opened the lower drawer. Inside lay folded prayer cloths, unused black candles, and a flat grey envelope pressed beneath a stack of guest ribbons. Its seal had been broken and warmed shut again. Elva said, "Those are household copies." Maren took the envelope. Household copies do not belong under bride ribbons. Audric's gaze flicked to Caressa. Caressa's expression remained composed, but a small color had risen along her cheekbones. Maren laid the envelope beside the first record and opened it. The second page was written in the same clean office hand, but the ink had bitten deeper into the parchment, as though the writer had pressed too hard while pretending calm. Supper continuity measure. Beneath it, 3 lines had been crossed, rewritten, and stamped. Maren did not read them aloud at once. Audric noticed. "What does it say?" Elva answered, before Maren could. "It says that in the absence of a properly seated ward, the housekeeper may preserve continuity by reciting the dead name order." Maren's eyes lifted. So that was the theft. Beneath the theft, not only the chair, the mouth. Audric looked between them. "Can the housekeeper not recite names?" "She can read letters," Maren said. "That is not the same as feeding the dead." Elva gave a short, controlled laugh. "You make memory sound mystical, because it protects your little authority." Maren touched the dead name cloth. "Memory is not mystical. It is exact. A wrong name in a wrong place is not remembrance. It is offering someone else's hunger to the living." The old hearth dimmed, only slightly, enough that every candle along the wall leaned blue. Caressa spoke softly. "If the keeper's role depends on one uncertain ward, then Lady Elva was right to stabilize it before a marriage supper. A royal house cannot let ancestral law hang from one woman's wounded pride." Maren looked at the long table, at the untouched plates, at the black bread filled with ash. Then perhaps a royal house should not wound the one woman who knows which dead must be fed first. Audric's voice cut through the murmurs. "Read the crossed line." Maren obeyed because the command served the truth, not because it came from him. She smoothed the parchment and read the buried words beneath the stamp. "Dead name keeper authority remains with ward seat holder until first course is accepted." Elva's face went still. Maren read the stamped correction below it. "Dead name keeper authority transferred to housekeeper office for engagement supper." A noblewoman at the far end whispered a prayer. Joss of the Winter Guard, who had stood near the back wall since the chairs turned, made a low sound in his throat. Even men who did not know hearth law understood when a sacred duty had been moved like a serving tray. Audric's eyes fixed on Elva. "You intended to name my dead tonight." Elva raised her chin. "I intended to prevent disorder by taking the ward seat and the dead name course, by ensuring the supper could proceed even if Maren Ashlow became difficult." Maren almost smiled, not because it amused her, because difficult was what the powerful called a lock that would not open to a stolen key. Elva turned to the court. "Ask yourselves what would have happened if the ancestral supper halted before Lady Caressa's announcement. Rival packs would hear that Morne rights depended on a servant's temper. I protected the house." Maren answered. "You protected the appearance of a house while reaching for the mouth that feeds its dead." Audric looked at the dead name cloth. "If she had named them?" Maren folded her hands together to keep them steady. "The first names would have heard no oath. The dead would be called, but not fed. Hunger would remain in the hall." The old hearth gave a soft, ugly hiss. Audric's face changed again by almost nothing. But Maren saw him feel it. Somewhere beneath his prince's training, beneath his guarded pride, his wolf understood hunger better than his court did. Elva took one step forward. "Then let Maren name them now. Let her prove she is not withholding the right for power." Maren turned to Audric. "Hear how quickly she gives back the mouth after the theft is seen." Elva snapped. "You were never stolen from. You were employed." "No," Maren said. "I was used as oath when the house needed me and service when the table wanted me gone." The words landed harder than she expected. Not on Elva. On Audric. He looked at the chair, bowed at Maren's feet, then at the empty space where it should have stood. "What restores the course?" Maren did not give him comfort. "The record must be corrected before the dead are named." Elva's eyes sharpened. Impossible. Once an engagement supper begins, seating records cannot be altered without royal witness and housekeeper's seal. Then witness it, Maren said to Audric. For a breath, everyone looked at him. The prince did not reach for apology. He reached for the knife beside his plate. The court inhaled. Audric turned the blade and sliced the grey service stamp cleanly through the center. The old hearth flared once, blue-white, but the second page did not burn. Instead, another line surfaced beneath the split seal, hidden under Elva's correction. Maren leaned over it, and the blood left her face. Audric saw. Read it. Morne did. Dead. Namekeeper authority transferred to housekeeper office before ward seat removal. Audric did not lower the knife. The split grey seal lay open beneath his blade, and the line beneath it waited in plain ink, colder than any accusation spoken aloud. Dead namekeeper authority transferred to housekeeper office before ward seat removal. Maren Ashlow looked at the words until they stopped being ink and became sequence. First, the mouth had been stolen, then the chair. Then the court had been invited to believe she was the disruption. Elva Thornridge's face did not break. That was almost admirable. She folded her hands at her waist and gave the room a measured breath, the kind, noble households trained into women who survived by never appearing startled. A continuity measure, she said. Nothing more. Audric's eyes remained on the page. You transferred the dead name authority before Maren was removed. Yes, Your Grace. In anticipation of disorder, Maren looked up. In anticipation of resistance, Elva turned toward her. In anticipation of a servant confusing duty with possession, the word servant had been used too many times tonight to cut the same way. Maren had begun to hear what sat beneath it. Not labor, not station. A warning. Do not remember too much. Do not stand where memory gives you shape. Audric finally lifted the knife away from the page. Where is the list you intended to use? Elva's mouth tightened. Caressa Vale's gaze shifted, almost invisibly, toward the sideboard where the covered first cups waited in a crescent of silver. Maren saw it. Audric saw Maren see it. The list, he said. Elva gave a small nod to a servant near the wall. Bring the housekeeper recitation copy. The servant hesitated before obeying. No one wanted to cross the floor while 31 carved chairs faced the wrong direction. Their wolf head backs stood like a judgment the court had not yet found language for. When the servant returned, he carried a narrow white scroll case bound in pale ribbon. Not smoke-stained cloth. Not hearth-marked linen. White parchment. Clean. Maren stared at it, and something in her chest went still. Elva accepted the case and opened it herself. For clarity, she said, old cloths are sentimental and difficult to read under candlelight. The house office prepared a clean recitation copy. Maren gave a soft laugh. It had no warmth in it. Elva looked at her. Do you find accuracy amusing? No, Maren said. Only the arrogance of thinking the dead prefer neat handwriting. Caressa's voice slipped in, cool as silver. If the dead are honored by being named, why should the material matter? Maren turned to her. Because this hall does not feed ink. It feeds witness. Audric held out his hand. Give me the copy. Elva did. He unrolled it across the table beside the dead name cloth. The contrast made several nobles lean back. White parchment beside smoke, stained linen, clean office script beside soot. Black stitching, graceful correction beside old scars. Maren did not touch the parchment at first. She touched the cloth. The cloth had memory in its repairs. A tear near the lower border from the winter Audric's younger cousins had fought over the first cup. A darker patch where Isolde Morne's hand had bled from a cracked ring. A faint burn near the third line, from the night old Prince Kael's wolf had howled under the floorboards before he died. A clean copy could contain names. It could not contain witness. Audric looked at her. Read them against each other. No, Elva said quickly. Too quickly. The room shifted. Audric's face hardened. Why? Elva lowered her chin. Because the dead name course is not a courtroom exercise. If we begin comparing sacred recitations under accusation, we invite mockery. Maren looked at the 31 turned chairs. Mockery already left with my chair. Audric's eyes did not leave Elva. She will compare them. Maren unfolded the dead name cloth fully. The old names circled the fabric in supper order, not blood rank. The first dead were not the greatest. They were the hungriest. Those who had died before burial bread, those whose wolves had gone unfed, those who had guarded winter doors and been forgotten by the living they saved. She read silently first. Then the office copy. At the 7th name, her finger stopped. Audric saw. What is missing? Elva said. Nothing. Material. Maren's gaze rose slowly. A dead man is not material. The old hearth shuddered low in its ash bed. Maren pointed to the cloth. Derek Morne, winter watchman of the North Stair, died during the second hunger before supper bell. Fed 7th. Audric frowned. I know Derek Morne. No one alive was encouraged to. Elva's voice sharpened. A collateral relation. His placement was always disputed. Maren looked at the white copy. On your list. He is moved below the bride blessing. Caressa stiffened. That is impossible. Maren turned the parchment so the line showed. The office copy had not removed Derek entirely. That would have been too easy to prove. It had pushed his name lower, past the living engagement cup, past the bride blessing, past the place where Caressa Vale's name had been lightly penciled into future ink. A dead hunger moved behind a living marriage. Audric's hand closed on the table edge. Maren said, The first dead course cannot pass if one of the hungry dead is delayed behind a living claim. Elva's composure thinned. The bride blessing is not a claim. It is alliance necessity. The dead do not eat necessity. Caressa's face went pale with anger. You imply my marriage starves the Morne line. No, Maren said. I imply someone tried to feed your announcement before a dead watchman. The 7th chair from the hearth scraped backward. Only one. Its carved wolf claws dragged over stone until it faced the white copy directly, not explaining. Marking sequence. Maren knelt beside the dead name cloth, not before Audric, not before Elva, but before the order itself. She took bone salt between 2 fingers and dusted the white parchment where Derek's name had been moved. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the clean ink blistered. A darker line rose beneath it, older than the office hand, hidden under fresh polish and powdered ash. Derek Morne moved below bride blessing by housekeeper copy. Audric turned his head toward Elva. His voice was quiet now, which made it worse. You altered the dead name order. Elva did not confess. She lifted her chin. I stabilized it for a marriage table. Maren looked down at the blistered line, and the old hall seemed to breathe around her. The 7th chair struck the floor once. The ash in the split bread shifted, gathering into a new sentence across the dead crust. The hungry dead were moved behind the living bride. The 7th chair did not move again. It had already marked the wound. Its carved wolf head faced the clean housekeeper copy, claws dug into black stone, as if an old watchman had risen only far enough to point at the place where he had been made less hungry for the convenience of a bride. The hungry dead were moved behind the living bride. The ash sentence lay across the split bread, plain enough for every noble at the table to read. Caressa Vale stood very still. Her anger had gone quiet, which made her look more royal than her outrage had. I did not ask for a dead man to be moved. No, Maren Ashlow said. You asked for a clean marriage table, Someone decided what had to be cleaned away. Elva Thornridge's eyes narrowed. Careful. Maren looked at her. I have been careful all night. Audric Morne kept one hand on the service record and one near the knife. Who was Derek Morne? Elva answered at once. A collateral watchman. A minor line. His placement has long been impractical. Maren touched the dead name cloth. Names are not placed by convenience. Then explain why his name matters more than an alliance that may keep this house standing. Maren lifted the cloth's seventh fold. The supper cloth was made strangely. Anyone seeing it from a distance would think the names were stitched in a simple circle. But the keeper knew where each fold opened. One fold for hunger, one for debt, one for blood, one for betrayal, one for the dead who had not been buried before the wolves began to howl under the floor. The seventh fold had been pressed flat so many times that the thread remembered being hidden. Maren slid her thumbnail beneath the soot-black stitch of Derek's name and loosened the fold. Audric stepped closer. Do not damage it. She did not look up. If I meant to damage the dead name cloth, Your Grace, I would have let your house office clean it. A few servants lowered their eyes. Elva's face sharpened. Maren opened the fold. A narrow strip of grey linen lay tucked beneath Derek Morne's name, smaller than a finger, darker at the edges from old hearth smoke. It was not a full account. The dead name cloth never carried full records. It carried teeth, enough to bite open the right drawer. Audric stared at it. What is that? A death account marker, Elva said. Outdated. Maren read the faded stitch. North Stair. Second hunger. Door held until supper bell. Account sealed under winter witness. The old hearth gave a low breath. Not a crack. A breath. Audric looked toward the north side of the hall, where a narrow stone stair vanished behind a hanging wolf banner. There is no account sealed under winter witness in the current house ledger. Maren looked at Elva. No, there is not. Elva smiled thinly. Because minor watch deaths were consolidated when the old records were repaired. Your mother's grief left the ledgers disorderly. Do not use my mother as a broom, Audric said. The words were not soft. They were not apology. But for the first time, something in them cut toward Elva instead of around her. Maren felt the shift and refused to lean into it. She had not come back to the threshold for a prince's better tone. Audric turned to the nearest guard. Bring the North Stair death ledger. Elva lifted a hand. Your Grace, the supper is already under strain. Opening death accounts before an engagement table will turn ritual correction into scandal. The scandal began before the first course, Audric said. Bring it. The guard left. No one touched the food. The first bread sat split and ash-filled. The bride blessing cup remained covered. The living plates gleamed uselessly before nobles who had dressed for power and now looked afraid of eating. Caressa sat slowly. If my announcement has been used to justify disorder, I would see the account as well. Elva turned toward her. Lady Caressa, with respect, Caressa said, her voice cold. I will not have my name fed over a dead man and then be told I brought dignity to the table. It was not kindness to Maren. It was self-preservation. Still, it made the room harder for Elva to control. The guard returned with a narrow ledger bound in cracked grey leather. Dust lay thick along its spine, but the clasp was newer, too new. Maren saw the replacement before Audric did. She pointed. The clasp. Audric looked down. Elva said, Old clasps break, Maren answered. Old ash does not gather under new metal unless someone sealed old pages after changing them. Audric opened the ledger. The first pages smelled of dry smoke and wolf oil. The old death accounts were written in heavy, uneven hand, each entry marked by hearth ash at the margin. Maren did not reach for the book. She leaned close enough to read, but not close enough to be accused of steering his fingers. Find second hunger, she said. Audric turned pages until the ash margins thinned. There, North Stair, Derek Morne. The name appeared, but the ink around it was wrong. Too dark in places, too pale in others. A repair had been made to look like age. Audric's voice lowered. "Read it." Maren read the visible line. Derek Morne, collateral watchman. Failed assigned duty at North Stair. Removed from 7th hunger placement pending house correction. Elva's breath eased, almost invisibly. Maren heard it, so she kept reading the page, not the ink. "The ash margin is broken." Audric looked closer. "Where?" Maren pointed to a faint grey interruption near the entry's left edge. "The hearth witness was scraped, not erased completely. Scraped, then smoked over." Elva snapped. "Are we now judging ash scratches?" "No," Maren said. "We are judging why a dead man blamed for failing a stair was still fed 7th for 3 generations. The 7th chair struck the floor once." Audric's eyes lifted. Maren took the bone salt. Elva moved. "No." Audric's hand caught her wrist before she touched Maren. The hall froze. Elva looked down at the prince's fingers around her sleeve. Audric released her at once, but his eyes had gone amber dark. "Do not stop the reading." Maren scattered bone salt over the broken ash margin. At first, the ledger resisted. Then the smoked repair lifted like a lie, losing warmth. Beneath the corrected line, older words surfaced in faded brown ink. Derek Morne held North Stair until supper bell. Thornridge key delayed. Door opened late. The room seemed to tilt. Elva's face emptied. Not enough to be confession. Enough to be fear. Audric read the line twice. Thornridge key. Maren did not look away from Elva. "The death account does not say he failed the stair. The 7th chair scraped forward another inch." Maren continued. "It says he held it. It says the key that should have relieved him was late." Caressa's gaze cut to Elva. "Your house key." Elva's mouth tightened. "Thornridge held many keys in the old winters. This proves nothing about tonight." "No," Maren said. "It proves why Derek had to be moved below your bride blessing. If his name was fed 7th, his death account had to be opened before the Living Alliance Cup. The old supper would have asked why the Thornridge key was late before Lady Caressa's name entered Morne Witness." Audric's hand closed around the ledger. Elva said, very softly, "You are making ghosts into politics." Maren answered, "You made politics out of ghosts first." The North Stair banner stirred, though no wind moved. The ash on the ledger margin darkened again, gathering not into accusation, but into record language. Cold, formal, impossible to soften. Derek Morne's death account. Altered to protect Thornridge key record. The North Stair banner kept moving. Not violently. Not like a storm had entered the hall. Only enough to remind every living person at the table that a dead watchman had once held a door while someone with a key came late. Derek Morne's death account, altered to protect Thornridge key record. The words darkened along the ledger margin until they looked less like ash than old bruising. Audric Morne did not ask Elva Thornridge whether it was true. Maren noticed that, too. He had begun to understand the difference between asking for denial and asking for proof. "Bring the key ledger," he said. Elva's face sharpened. "Your Grace, house key ledgers contain private household security. The hall is refusing supper. The hall is being provoked." Audric turned his amber-dark eyes on her. "By whom?" Elva held his gaze for one breath too long, then lowered hers. "I will fetch it myself." "No," Maren said. Every eye turned. Maren stood beside the dead name cloth with her hands folded before her, the ward seat still waiting behind her. "If Lady Elva fetches it alone, the record will arrive already corrected." A low murmur moved through the nobles. Elva's smile returned, thin and dangerous. You accuse easily for a woman still outside her chair. I read patterns. You read resentment. Maren looked at the North Stair ledger. Resentment did not scrape Derek Morne's ash margin. Audric gave a small motion to 2 guards. Escort the house clerk. Bring the key ledger sealed. Elva's fingers closed around the key ring at her waist, and for the first time, Maren saw the office for what it truly was. Not keys to cupboards, silver rooms, guest doors, and linen chests, but keys to memory. Whoever controlled what was opened, controlled what could be remembered before the living ate. Caressa Vale watched Elva now, with colder attention. Her pride had not become kindness, but self-interest could do what conscience did not. She did not want her engagement cup tied to a dead watchman's delayed door. The guards returned with a square ledger, bound in black hide, and sealed with 3 grey ribbons. The clerk who carried it looked sick. Audric cut the ribbons himself. Elva inhaled sharply. That seal is housekeeper authority. Then the housekeeper authority will survive being read. Maren did not smile, but the ward seat gave a small scrape behind her, as if approving sequence rather than sentiment. Audric opened the ledger to the older sections first. The pages were marked by winter years, each key issued and returned in a narrow hand. North Stair, lower pantry, widow gallery, old hearth press, bride silver cabinet, ancestral sideboard, second hunger, Maren said. Audric turned the pages. There it was. North Stair key held by Thornridge office. Issued before supper bell. Returned after. The return time had been overwritten. Not clumsily, not recently. The correction was old, smoked, and sealed beneath office ash. Audric looked at the page. Bone salt? Maren met his eyes. Salt reveals what the hearth witnessed. It does not create what was not there. I know. No, she said quietly. You are learning. The words cut between them, clean and cold. Audric accepted them without flinching. That was new. Maren dusted the margin. The old correction loosened. Beneath the return time, another notation rose in cramped grey script. Key returned after first hunger bell. Delay recorded by Isolde Morne. Transfer review ordered. Audric went still. Elva said quickly. Lady Isolde ordered many reviews in grief. Not all were carried forward. Maren read the next line before Elva could bury it beneath explanation. Thornridge key privilege to be reduced if dead. Namekeeper confirms delay before full supper. The hall turned colder. Caressa's hand tightened around her napkin. Then Derek's name being 7th would have forced that confirmation. Yes, Maren said, before any bride blessing, before any new alliance, before the living table could call itself clean. Elva's composure hardened into something like iron. And if the confirmation had been false, if a servant with old cloth and salt could reduce a noble house's authority because she disliked its order? Maren looked at her. You are still afraid of the same thing your ancestors feared. What is that? A witness you cannot hire. Audric's hand moved across the key ledger. Current year. Elva stepped forward. Your Grace, current year. The clerk turned the pages with shaking fingers until the fresh ink appeared. Maren saw the entry before Audric spoke. Old hearth press, accessed by housekeeper office. Ward seat storage, accessed by housekeeper office. Dead name cloth lower fold, accessed by housekeeper office. All within the last 3 days. All before the engagement supper. Audric's voice dropped. You opened the dead name cloth storage. Elva did not blink. To inspect ritual condition. You opened ward seat storage. To correct seating overflow. Maren pointed to the final line on the page. It had been written lighter than the others, as if the clerk hoped ink could become invisible by being timid. Read that one. The clerk swallowed. Belonging register. Maren's pulse changed. Not faster. Deeper. Audric looked up. What belonging register? Elva answered too quickly. An old household list. Servants, wards, temporary guests, dependents. Nothing sacred. Maren's eyes stayed on the ledger. There is no such thing as nothing sacred in a supper hall built over graves. Audric turned the page. The belonging register was not bound inside the key ledger. It had been tucked between pages, a loose sheet folded twice and sealed in pale wax. Elva's seal. Audric broke it. Maren knew before she saw the words. Some wounds announced themselves by the way the room suddenly has too little air. The sheet listed names under 3 headings: blood, guest, service. Maren Ashlow's name had once been written in a 4th column, ward oath. Someone had scraped the column pale and stamped over it, service. The stamp matched the one used on the ward seat correction. For the first time that night, Maren's hand trembled. Not because she had not known, because knowing privately was one pain. Seeing the theft written cleanly for the court was another. Audric looked at her name. Then, at Elva. His voice did not soften. You reclassified her. Elva lifted her chin. I clarified her. Maren touched the edge of the sheet. No, you moved me from oath to usefulness. The old hearth gave a low, hungry sound. The 31 chairs remained turned from the table, but the ward seat finally lifted its carved wolf head from the stone. Ash crept across the belonging register, not adding romance, not declaring blood, not crowning anyone, only restoring the column Elva had scraped away. Ward oath holder, erased from belonging register before dead name course. Maren's name returned before she touched the chair, not loudly, not beautifully. Ash crossed the belonging register in a thin grey line, rebuilding the scraped column letter by letter, until Ward Oath stood beside her name, where Elva Thornridge's service stamp had tried to bury it. Maren Ashlow, Ward Oath holder. The hall did not applaud. The dead did not need applause. Audric Morne stared at the restored column, as if the old hearth had placed a blade across the supper table, and asked him whether he finally knew which side of it he stood on. Elva Thornridge's voice came carefully. A ward oath does not make her blood. Maren looked at her. No. The answer unsettled the room more than if she had claimed otherwise. Caressa Vale, still pale from seeing her bride blessing named after an unfed dead man, studied Maren with new caution. Then what does it make you? Maren folded the dead name cloth once, not fully, only enough to keep its edge from touching the spilled wine. Responsible. Several nobles glanced at one another, disappointed by the plainness of the word. They wanted something easier to fear. A hidden daughter, a blood claimant, a forbidden bride. Something that could be killed, married, bought, or locked away. Responsibility was harder. Audric's voice cut through the murmurs. What authority does a ward oath holder have before the bride blessing? Elva stepped in at once. Very little. She preserves dead, name order, and assists the housekeeper office. No, Maren said. Audric did not look away from her. Then tell me. Maren's fingers rested on the smoke-stained cloth. Before the first ancestral course is accepted, the ward oath holder may call the belonging register against the dead, name cloth. Not to decide inheritance, not to crown a bride. To make sure no living place is fed under a false name while the dead are still waiting. A silence opened around the table. Audric turned slowly toward Elva. Elva's mouth tightened. An archaic safeguard. Then why erase it? Maren asked. Elva's eyes sharpened. Because archaic safeguards are often weaponized by people with no rightful standing. Maren almost smiled. No. You erased it because I would have been required to read the register before Lady Caressa's blessing cup. Caressa stood very still. Audric looked at the loose belonging sheet again. Bring the bride record, Elva said. Your Grace, the bride record. This time he did not raise his voice. He did not need to. A clerk hurried from the side passage and returned with a white leather folder sealed in silver wax. Lady Caressa's family crest marked the outside. 3 pale wolves beneath a crescent. Caressa's face had gone cold, but not guilty. My house record was delivered by my father's envoys. I do not accuse your house, Audric said. Maren heard what he did not say. Yet, Elva did too. The folder was placed before him. Audric broke the silver seal and opened the bride record beside the ash-marked belonging register. The parchment inside was elegant, written in trained court hand. Bloodline, dowry alliances, witness names, supper precedents, bride blessing placement, everything beautiful, everything clean. Maren did not trust clean records near old hunger. Audric glanced at her. Read it. Maren did not move. I do not hold the chair yet. Elva gave a sharp laugh. Convenient. Maren looked at her. Sequence. The ward seat behind her scraped once. Audric's eyes lowered to it, then rose again. What must be corrected first? Maren did not soften for him. The court must acknowledge that my place was not service overflow. Audric held the belonging register, so the court could see the restored column. Maren Ashlow's place at the supper is ward oath, entered under matriarch oath, and restored by hearth witness. It was not service overflow. The words crossed the hall like cold iron. They were not apology. They were record. For now, that mattered more. The ward seat turned from the threshold and scraped back to the lower left side of the table, where it had stood before servants carried it out like shame. It stopped there, facing the dead name cloth. Maren walked to it. She did not sit. She placed one hand on the carved wolf head and looked at Elva. Who stamped me service? Elva's answer was smooth. The house office. Whose hand? Elva said nothing. Audric looked at the clerk. The clerk's face was grey. Maren turned to the bride record. Bone salt. Audric pushed the bowl toward her. This time, she did not ask permission. She scattered salt over the bride record's supper precedence line. At first, the elegant ink held. Then the silver witness marks began to bead like sweat. Under Caressa's bride placement, another line surfaced thin, cramped, hidden beneath ceremonial flourishes. Bride blessing to proceed, before Thornridge review. Caressa's lips parted. Elva whispered. That is not accusation. It is scheduling. Maren dusted the next margin. A second hidden notation appeared beneath the dowry witnesses. Thornridge key privilege to remain unreduced upon successful engagement supper. Audric's eyes darkened until they looked almost gold-black. Caressa turned to Elva. My marriage was used to preserve your office? Elva's composure cracked for half a breath. Your marriage would have strengthened the house. My name was placed over Derek Morne, for stability. For your key ring, Maren said. Elva's face sharpened. You understand nothing about holding a great house together. Maren looked at the untouched living plates. I understand the difference between holding a house together and tying its dead beneath the table. The old hearth flared low and blue. Audric's wolf stirred behind his eyes. Not a full change, not even close. But the air around him tightened, and several nobles lowered their gaze. Read the final witness line, he said. Maren's throat felt dry. She already knew where the ash was gathering. At the bottom of the bride record, beneath the silver wax imprint, a faint grey thread of hearth ash curled into the paper. Maren brushed it once, with bone salt. The seal blistered. Beneath the witness line, a name appeared, where no name should have been. Elva, Thornridge, acting belonging witness. The court went still. Maren read the line beneath it. Ward oath holder removed, so housekeeper office could witness bride belonging. Caressa took one step back from the table. Audric looked at Elva, and this time there was no room left for procedural mercy. You intended to witness belonging in her place. Elva lifted her chin, still not confessing. still reaching for law. In the absence of a seated ward oath holder, she said, the housekeeper office may preserve continuity. Maren looked at the ward seat, then at the 31 chairs, then at the bride record, the key ledger, the altered death account, the belonging register, and the ash-filled bread. No, she said, in the absence you created. The old hearth answered. Every black candle around the hall went out at once. Only the ash in the dead corpse remained lit. Across the bride record, the final hidden sentence burned through the clean parchment. House records forged to remove ward oath witness before bride blessing. The candles died without smoke. One breath before, the Morne Winter Supper Hall had been silver, black, and gold. Silver cups, black banners, gold fire trembling over noble rings. Then every flame vanished, except the ash inside the first dead corpse. House records forged to remove ward oath witness before bride blessing. The sentence burned across Lady Caressa Vale's clean bride record, brighter than any marriage seal. Elva Thornridge stood very still, not defeated, cornered. There was a difference, and Maren Ashlow knew better than to mistake one for the other. Elva lifted her chin. Forgery is a grave word for procedural preservation. Audric Morne looked at the extinguished candles, the turned chairs, the altered key ledger, the moved dead name, the restored ward oath column, and finally, at the woman who had spent the evening making cruelty sound like order. Then we will use plain words, he said. You removed a lawful ward seat. You reclassified a ward oath holder as service. You altered the dead name order. You used my engagement supper to protect Thornridge Key privilege. Elva's mouth tightened. I protected Morne's stability. No, Maren said. You protected the office that could decide who belonged. The old hearth gave a low flare, not enough to relight the candles, enough to show the truth of the room. The nobles had not leaned away from the ash because it was frightening. They had leaned away because it could not be flattered. Caressa stepped back from her bride record. Her face was pale, pride wounded, but her eyes were clear enough now to see danger. Remove my name from that cup. Elva turned sharply. Lady Caressa, I said remove it. Caressa's voice cut like polished ice. If my blessing cannot stand unless a dead watchman is delayed and a ward oath is erased, then it is not a blessing. It is contamination. Maren looked at her for the first time, without anger leading the way. Not trust, not friendship, only acknowledgement that self-preservation had chosen a clean sentence. Audric turned to the court. The engagement blessing will not proceed tonight. A rustle broke through the nobles. He lifted one hand. Silence returned. The dead name course comes first, he said. The ward seat will remain present. The ward oath holder will witness belonging before any living claim is fed. Maren did not move. The ward seat stood in its restored place at the lower left side of the table, carved wolf head facing the dead name cloth. It no longer bowed at her feet. It waited where law had placed it. Audric looked at her. Maren Ashlow. Her name sounded different in his mouth now. Not softer, more careful. You may take your seat. A small pain moved through her, not because she wanted to refuse everything, because part of her had once wanted that exact sentence from him so badly that she would have forgiven the room for less, but tonight had stripped mercy down to its bones. No, she said. Audric's eyes narrowed slightly. Elva's mouth almost curved, as if refusal might yet be turned against her. Maren kept her gaze on the prince. I will not sit because you allow it. The hall held still. Audric did not speak. Good. He was learning that not every silence belonged to him. Maren touched the back of the ward seat. The court must correct the record, not offer me a chair out of guilt. Audric lowered his head once. Not a bow, not surrender. A prince, recognizing sequence. He took the service error record, the forged belonging sheet, and the bride witness page, then laid them before the dead name cloth. "By Morne witness," he said, voice carrying to the rafters. Maren Ashlow was not service overflow. She was ward, oath holder, under matriarch oath. Her place was removed unlawfully before the dead were named. The correction is public. The ward seat scraped back half an inch. Maren felt the old hearth waiting. She sat, not quickly, not gratefully, lawfully. The moment her weight touched the seat, the carved wolf heads of the 31 chairs turned not toward the living plates, not yet, but toward the dead name cloth. Maren lifted the black bread. The ash inside still glowed. She broke the first piece with both hands and placed it on the ancestral plate. "Audric Morne," she said, voice steady. "North Stair watchman. Held the door until supper bell. Fed 7th by hunger, not rank." The 7th chair lowered its carved head. Maren named the dead one by one, not all of them. Not every grief in Morne stone, only the first course, the hungry order, the names Elva's clean copy had tried to move behind, living convenience. With each name, the ash in the bread softened into steam. The first cup darkened, then cleared. The black candles relit one at a time, with blue-white flame. At the head of the table, Audric's hand clenched near his ribs. Maren saw the wolf hunger move through him. For years, the Morne bloodline had been fed ceremony instead of order. Its prince had mistaken discipline for strength, while his own ancestral hunger gnawed beneath the table. When she spoke the final name of the first course, every chair turned toward the table. This time, they did not face the living in obedience. They faced the table because the dead had been fed first. Audric drew a breath, so deep the nearest candles bent toward him. Behind his shoulders, for one flicker of moonlight, Maren saw the shape of a great black wolf lift its head from starvation. Not healed fully, not freed from every old wound, but fed enough to stop devouring itself. Elva saw it too. Fear passed over her face before she hid it. Audric looked at the guards. "Lady Elva Thornridge is removed from housekeeper authority. Seal her office, keys, ledgers, and all supper records. She will answer before hearth witness, not court favor." Elva did not beg. She turned to Maren instead. "You think they will love you for this?" Maren looked at the fed candles. No. That answer unsettled Elva more than triumph would have. Maren continued, "I think the dead will eat before them." The guards took Elva from the hall. No chair turned to follow her. That was judgment enough. When the doors closed, Audric remained standing at the head of the table. The court waited for him to reclaim the room with some clean royal phrase. He did not. He came to the lower left side, slowly, in front of everyone. Then he set his own cup down beside Maren's ward seat. An offer, not his chair, not pity. "Witness, I allowed them to question what my mother entered," he said. "I let silence manage the table. I was wrong." Maren looked at him for a long moment. The apology did not erase the corridor. It did not lift the scrape of her chair from memory. It did not turn service into belonging by itself. But it did not ask to be forgiven quickly, and that was the first honest thing about it. "You will not give me belonging," she said. Audric's amber eyes held hers. "No, you will witness it, yes. And when the next bride blessing comes, no living name crosses this table before the dead name course." His mouth tightened, almost with pain, almost with respect. By Morne law, Maren lifted the cup he had set beside her. She did not drink first. She poured the first dark drop onto the ancestral plate. Only then did the hall breathe. Outside, beyond the winter windows, wolves began to howl along the old foundations. Not mourning, not hunger. Answer. The Morne Winter Supper Hall glowed with relit black candles, restored chairs, and a ward seat no one could call overflow again. Maren Ashlow sat at the table where they had tried to erase her, not as blood, not as bride, not as service, as the oath that kept the dead from eating the living.